And welcome aboard the Tabletop Express. My name is Chris Barrows, and this is Creators Corner. I am excited today that Randy Flynn is here to join us. You may know Randy's work in particular. Now, I guess we can say it, Randy. I'll say it because it is official. We're currently sitting in the top 100 on Board Game Geek. Really cool to see that happen today, as I knew you were coming on. So welcome here to the Tabletop Express and here to Creators Corner.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Well, Randy, first and foremost, the way this episode always starts is the origin story, and the origin for you in terms of playing board games and joining at getting into the hobby to the level of seriousness that you design a game. Where does your story begin?
So it's interesting. I knew that was your first question, so I actually spent some time thinking about it because I've answered essentially that question probably 5 times so far, and it's like, well, wait, what's more to this? And I realized one thing I don't talk a lot about is what I did when I was a kid.
Yeah,
and I did design a few games. I don't think of them as games as I do today, but they were. There were some war games, there were some car racing games, there was a golf game we played. But the one that really stuck out when I thought about it was I love to create things. I've just always been a creator, whether it was, doing things that are like just models, from instructions, or whether actually like designing them myself. In fact, usually the models lead to me like figuring out how can I create something different. I created this system of creating cars from basically like toothpicks or Q-tips, index cards, and spools of thread, typically along with Scotch tape and maybe glue in the thread itself. And I wish I had one of these or had a picture from one of these, but you can basically imagine 2 spools of thread with like toothpicks or Q-tips through them attached to this thing constructed from index cards. And so, okay, that's great. You can push those along, but no, we didn't push them around. We created, and I started this, but I got some of the neighborhood kids involved as well. We created tracks from the index cards that were like bobsled tracks. And they would be raised up. I remember doing this in my basement. I would make curves. I'd been watching the Olympics. Must have been a little bit after the Lake Placid Olympics or something, if I remember correctly. And so you would just, make your car, design your car. You'd have the track. You'd put the cars at the top. And then you just, let them go. And I think we'd time them. I don't remember, because I don't think you could really do 2 at once. That didn't really work out very well. So I spent a lot of time stealing my mom's thread spools and using up a lot of glue and stuff, making these cars and racing them. And I loved the competition. I loved the creativity. It was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to see other people get involved and try to do the same thing. So that was one of the early things I really remember about, doing game design, if you will.
That's really it's funny when we think about where we start doing things. I mean, I was just joking the other day that when my son's not designed anything, I've got I think of the 15 files on my computer from Canva where he tried to design a game like Pokemon, except it was with dinosaurs fighting, and it's neat. Like I hold on to them. He didn't stick with that one per se, but like I always I hold on to that. I printed one out. I'm like, I'll remind you about this one day. When you're creative juices are flowing. Hey, you want to build that dinosaur battle game now?
Yeah.
It's neat to go back again, I think, to that origin. Obviously, when it comes down to it, you certainly, your name now is obviously well known when it comes to Cascadia, which has taken off. I mean, you can talk BGG, whatever, but this game really just, when you talk about the hotness in board games, it's blown up in so many awesome ways. Did you, when you designed this, kind of anticipate this game really being something that people were going to fall in love with? Because this was coming off of, and it's in that series that people often connect to Calico, which obviously came with some really great reviews, but I know it's hard to anticipate how successful a game is going to be from talking to anyone. You really, you really are kind of at the beck and whim of the board gamers in the hobby themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I've always had confidence in my ability to design, or not always, but from a fairly early point, I got where I was like, I'm confident in my ability to design a game that is fun to play. Like I got to that level of confidence. But but you've touched on some of those points. It's like, okay, that's great, but that's one small part of the process, or it's a critical part. Without it, not a lot of fun there. But so many other things have to happen to get to what you're talking about. And no, I had no idea. I, had one game signed at that point. Well, technically two, one and related to Breeze and its card game counterpart that, are still in process now. So I had no published games, but I had kind of had that confidence of, hey, I've gotten one signed, and I went through and designed this, and it was interesting because I started getting played. We have a wonderful design group in Seattle that has been so critical to the success of many people of names that whether it's the Flat Out folks, Molly, Rob, and Sean, both for their publishing, but also for all the designs that they've come out with. Joseph Chen for Fantastic Factories, Emma Larkins for Abandoned All Artichokes. I mean, I can kind of just like keep going. There's actually a bunch, and there's some names you don't know that you probably will eventually know. And all of these people were so supportive of each other. And it was great because we had people playing these games that were both critical and really invested in everyone's success. And so, I remember the first playtest of Cascadia, and I don't think it was a great game at that point, to be honest. It had a lot of limitations. But the folks who played it seemed to point out where it was really shining, even if the overall experience wasn't there. And so it really gave me a lot of confidence to push it forward, and also just advice about what was working and what was not. Now, admittedly, some of that advice was conflicting, but nonetheless, that's one of the jobs of a designer, especially when you playtest a lot, is filtering that out. How do I deal with the fact that one person wants it to be more complicated, one person wants it to be simpler, or whatever it is. So I think through that process, I was able to make it, into a very good game. But then the next part, getting it published, I talked to, a friend, Sean, Flat Out, and then eventually the Flat Out folks about it and all of that. And they had not published a game yet. They were still just 3 people trying to create a company, and they were working on Calico at the time. The crowdfunding campaign for Calico was still several months away. And I'm like, do I do this? Is this, I've got a game signed. I don't need to take this leap, but I just loved working with all of these folks. And I actually sat back and thought, I actually have a ton of confidence in these people and what they're creating. And I've seen what they're doing with Calico, and I like it. And so, it didn't take me long to go back and say, yep, let's do this. And so Cascadia at that point became, this is what's going to come after Calico. So again, I'm to the next stage, but still the answer to your question would have been no. One, I hadn't seen the success of Calico yet, and two, I hadn't gone through that whole process. So of course it was fantastic to see Calico's success, to see how gorgeous it was, to see what Beth did with the game, what Dylan, the graphic designer, did with the game, what the whole team did with the design. It was awesome. But then it was really working with the Flat Out folks, where the game went from good ideas, good things that hold together, to just kind of getting better and better and better. And yet through all of that, you still ask the question of, okay, you go into the crowdfunding campaign, you get almost, whatever it was, lots of money, crowdfunding campaign, it still is hard to say, what's the success at this stage, et cetera. And I don't think it was until people started getting the game and playing it and actually talking about it that I was like, okay, I think I see that this is going to hold up. I mean, people are actually really enjoying it. Not oh yeah, I backed this cool looking game, I play it once or twice and I'm done, kind of thing. It's like, okay, yeah, it's holding up.
It's interesting though, because I think that's one of the reasons I asked these types of questions is you just kind of talked about that process, and you talk about when this game for you was not necessarily done, but at least it's something you could start to discuss, right? And Calico's not even out there yet, right? So we could think about the games, but it's to think about the game. It's one of those things that look at the market. Just because you see a game out at this point, another one at this point, the origins of those games and their design is all at different points, because some people are working on games for 4, 5, 6 years, other people for a year and a half. So I think it's really awesome to hear that part of the story. You also get to, in this, you talk about the relationship part. And that group that you spoke about, I've heard, and I've had people talk about that working group before. Fantastic, everything from about Fantastic Factories, and I know Brian Chandler, who's a part of this channel, and we just did his top 20 more recently. He's told me wonderful things about this. So talk about what a group like that means for a designer, and how important do you think it is for a designer to try to find maybe not a replica of that group, but that kind of community to really look at and play their game?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't like to pigeonhole a process, like, oh, this is the way you develop a game, or this is the way you develop a community, because there's always multiple roads to that, and people are different in what they need. I'm actually fairly I get fairly focused, and I can design a lot on my own, both in my head, in my office, and on my computer, and with my own parts. I can be alone and make a ton of progress. Um, and I have, I think, certainly my first game, To Breeze, probably got farther along that way on its own. But when you go out to test a game, unless you're just one of these sort of like geniuses who can see like every angle of a game and understand society and how it will react, which I don't doubt there are a few of those in the industry, but they're pretty darn rare. You need to get different perspectives somehow. And from my perspective, I want people who have barely played games to play my game, unless it's some big Euro that, is not a good place for that person to start. But I want to see that reaction. I want to see, the regular game players' reaction, the people who are happy to come to a playtest event and see it. And I want to get designers' reactions, because I have to recognize they're different, but they can see things about the design that others cannot. And often you get to a point of certain understanding much more quickly with folks like that, especially if you have a great rapport and trust with them. And that's what I think a lot of us, have felt in that group, is no one's going to come here and like bash your game. Like if they're saying something critical, they're saying it because they think they're giving you great information about how this game can be better, or can reach the goals that you have, or whatever it is. And all of my games have critical parts that I can often attribute to another designer, or sometimes a playtester. Like, I have a rule in To Breeze, which I won't go into detail here, but it's called the Joseph Chen rule to me and to the group, because he was the one who pushed the playtest really, really hard, forced the issue, and showed what the problem was. He didn't say it. He didn't do it. He just saw it and played it, and made it very, very obvious. And I really appreciated, that kind of work. And there are certainly people who aren't designers or playtesters who do very similar things. Although most people, I think, who do that, if they're not our designers, they do design. Usually you talk to them enough, you go, yeah, they're trying out some design, because they know enough about how this works that they can't help but be intrigued and give it a shot. So
with that in mind, because you talk about getting that direction, when you're trying to decide, does this game need to maybe become heavier, lighter, etc., ultimately, does that come for you personally back to ultimately what your vision is, where you want this to fit a category, or are you flexible in that department and say, okay, maybe we do get a little heavier with this game, maybe I don't make it as much of a family game as and obviously in the case of Cascadia, it's obviously a very family friendly game, but how do you kind of make that decision that I need to make a shift versus I got to hold strong with my original vision here?
I'd love to have a pat answer for that, but I think in each case it comes across a little differently. I will say that I do like for myself to have the flexibility to kind of let the design go where it needs to some extent. And so with Cascadia, some of the early, like very early comments were just about how like zen and chill it was. Right. Now it's funny because there's some people now who you can read BGG reviews of it. They will use those words and talk about it. But back then it was even more zen and chill. And I remember just going, there's not quite enough tension. There's not enough tension here, right? And so I knew that needed to be improved, despite some people really enjoying it. I was like, yeah, that's going to be a pretty limited audience. And even I'm probably going to get, a little bored of playing it after a while. Now, on the flip side, I've later had, someone play the game who was very frustrated by the lack of tension. And there was definitely I definitely took some from that feedback, and said, yep, we need to ratchet it up. But I didn't do what they thought needed to be done, because they had a different set of goals in mind for the types of games that they like to see or like to produce or whatever. And I was just like, I don't think that's where I want to go with Cascadia. Like, could I? Maybe, but I think it's heading in a different direction and doing it rather well. So I really don't think I want to push that. And that's why Cascadia, in the end, there's not much take that. There's not much, you can do a little bit to pay attention to what others are doing, especially when it comes to habitats, all that. But if your goal is going to just mess up your partner and hope you win, it's probably not going to work. And if it does, it's probably still not going to be fun. It's not going to be very interesting. Certainly that's a direction the game could have gone. But in the end, I decided, very much not to do that, and flat out was very much on board with that same direction as well.
No, and one of the things that you did get to do was in this, you have Beth Sobel as the artist. So can you talk about, when you look at a game, what role art plays? Because thematically, obviously, this it's got such a beautiful setting when you look at just all the different areas on each of these pieces. And yes, we were playing a token in this game down to represent an animal, but when it comes down to it, the pieces themselves, I mean, it looks like a beautiful landscape. So, what role was art going to play for you, at the start of this and what do you kind of take away? Because I've heard a lot of great stories about the working relationship that people have had with Beth, and just the joy that comes from the final product that comes when working with Beth.
And as a first-time designer going through this, I mean, getting like live art from Beth through the process, like especially the first time, was just like, wow. Like, it's just like, oh my goodness, that work is being applied to my game. She is making my game beautiful. And there's a ton of pictures of Cascadia prototypes out on Twitter and stuff, and you can see what I did with it. From a prototype level, I do okay. I actually do even better now, but I do okay. But it's not art, and it's not that immersive feel, and it's not giving it a whole like unique vibe to the game, which is something that Beth did an absolutely wonderful job of, as well as Dylan Mangini with graphic design, and Sean, Molly, and Rob, kind of directing all of that. Because, I mean, you saw what they did with Calico, and although I feel like Calico is more different from Cascadia than most people like to think, from an art perspective, you can kind of see the whole same thing come together. What's the vibe we want? How do we present that on a cover to catch people's attention? How do we make it so that when people are playing with the pieces and looking at them, they're kind of happy with what they're putting together? How is it that when they get to the end of the game, and this is something I said about Cascadia early on, but I think it was already probably true of Calico, like, I want people, when they finish playing a game of Cascadia, to take a picture of their environment. Like, they're like, this looks cool. I want to take a picture of that. And I can say, well, I designed the game to allow that. And it's kind of true. And Flat Out actually helped in some ways with changes to design after they got it, that made it so the environment you're going to make is cool. But I can't, actually make it look pretty. And so once we started seeing, the tiles from Beth and seeing them put together, and seeing some of what she did with the water and the stones, like things that, there's some things that you're kind of giving art direction, right? We want this to happen. We need this to, and then there's things with Beth, and she's done a lot of games. She knows how this works. So she just comes back with something, that she comes up with for how it should go together. And you kind of go, wow, that is awesome. And there's a number of things in Cascadia that are exactly like that. And the water and stones is one of them. When we started seeing how the rivers looked together, I don't know. We didn't direct any of that. She came back and just did some really cool stuff.
I like I said, I had to ask because I've just heard some really great stories, and I haven't had the pleasure myself, but I just know that obviously tremendously talented person, and I think it's great to hear about those working experiences with artists and designers, because often when I talk to a designer, we're talking about the design of a game, but the art has played such a critical role in it, and artists and illustrators, I want to make sure they get their due, so I had to ask.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit. One of the questions that actually Brian had actually pinged me, he could not join us tonight, but he had asked me to ask. Said, I've seen you testing prototypes at cons recently. Is this for an upcoming game, or is there something you're excited about developing? And I wasn't sure if it might be related to, because I did want to talk to you about Tabriz, So, but that was the question Brian didn't want to ask. He had seen you testing something out, and he may not be able to give something away, but I had to ask because Brian, friend of the channel here. So
yeah, so Tabriz was the first game that I publicly play tested. And I did that actually before kind of that Seattle designer group really gelled, although only a few months before that happened. And in fact, one of the first play testers for Tabriz was Joseph Chen, Fantastic Factories. And in fact, he played it twice, the first playtest event I went to. And I mean, this is where you get into the, encouragement. I had played Fantastic Factories, I think, once before at a playtest event. Like I just barely started going to them, and I met him, and I kind of saw it at ETX when it was up for the Lucy Award and various things. And here was this, guy who I could see the quality of his prototype, because, Joseph also did the art for Fantastic Factories. So here he's got a prototype going to Kickstarter like in a year or something. And it's like, my partner looked at it and said, why does his prototype look like a shipped game? And I was like, well, because he did the art. He learned to do the art, and he did it, and it looks great. But he was definitely one of the people who encouraged me. So Tabriz was the first game I brought to public playtesting. Again, ton of pictures of it on Twitter, over the first couple of years after getting it signed. So definitely for most of my stuff, being very public about what I'm playtesting and seeing out there has been a part of the process. There are projects, moving forward that may see less of that, but in general, I want to be as public as I can be, with the stuff that's going on, get feedback, excitement, just engage people. So currently, I have a number of games that are not signed that you will see out there. And most recently, Railworks is a kind of worker placement, pick up and deliver route building game that Aaron Mesburn and I are co-designing, which we're pitching to a few companies and working hard on. We have a playtest of it later this week. That's been a fun process for a game that in the end, it's probably a similar level of complexity to Breeze, although at various points during its development, it's been more. And so that one's definitely been out there some, although we, for a long time, just kept it with us because we weren't sure what the heck it was. And then I've got a couple of abstract games that aren't signed, one that's my design and one that's a co-design with Sean Stankiewicz of Flat Out Games, plus a roll and write. And these are ones I still take to cons and I'm still massaging in hopes of getting them signed, and we'll be showing to others in the future. So yeah, I really like to have everything out there that I can. And it's a fun part of the process. Public playtesting at cons and at local events and all that are both like really important to me developing games, and I also really enjoy it. It's a fun way to be out in the community and meet people, and get to play games too. So,
which really is what it comes down to. You want people to play games and have a good time. And I like what you spoke to earlier, which was the fact that you want people who may not always play games to try a game and get their feedback, because honestly, when it comes down to it, some of those folks probably are going to give you some of the, I can only imagine, give you some really good thoughts and ideas, just because they're not looking for, well, I'm going to compare this to this. They're able to give you real feelings about how something plays without trying to make that comparison. Because like you said, I do, you've heard the comparison of Calico and Cascadia out there, but it's true. They are very different games. It's more that they come in that sequence. And in the long run, I've long said to people, well, there's a reason they're both in my collection. They're very different. They're very different games. They're not the same game. So
yeah, it's definitely interesting when you to just get those different reactions, because I certainly respect getting, publishers to give me their perspective on the market and what will sell and what kind of sales a certain kind of game will be. But it's only, part of the picture in understanding your own games. The two abstracts I did play test at Dragonflight here. I play tested a number of times. These two young women sat down and played one of the games and then the other. And it was really interesting, seeing their reactions to the games, because both of them were like, we really like both of these games. But they were like, the first one, like, I was so engaged. Is that published? Can you tell, how do I get this when it comes out? And so it's a little interesting then asking them a few questions about, what it was that drew them in about that versus the other one. Because in some ways I was surprised that was the choice. Although I could tell when they were playing it, but it somehow with their background and other things, I was expecting the other game to be more popular with them, but it was clearly was not. And so you can learn a lot from those discussions. Just gotta ask some good questions and listen.
Where for you, where do because you're now talking about you've got a bunch of prototypes you can get out there. What is your process, your creative process in coming up with ideas and what's worth making a prototype, for and then bringing out versus this is a good idea versus I wrote this down, but maybe put this aside because you're only going to obviously be able to do so much at a time realistically.
Oh yeah, I very much feel that last part because I can point to my notebooks to about 20 or more designs that I think are worth pursuing, and I'm pursuing of the ones that aren't already somewhat in development. I'm only pursuing like 3 of them, just due to time and energy. So yeah, and the answer to that isn't necessarily easy either. I can say that one of the things that was important for me when I started designing games was to not just like pigeonhole myself and design like, this is the kind of game I'm good at and I want to do. So my first design that was designed all the way to being playable was a civilization building game that was kind of like I had played Catan, I played Civilization, Sid Meier's Civilization on the computer for years, and I was like looking at ideas between the two and coming up with something, and I did that. And my next one was let's talk about worker movement and more money and bazaars and materials and kind of some of the traditional Euro game trading pieces, and that out of that came Tabriz, which was also about simplifying. Since my first game was a very long and complicated one, I was like, okay, if I want to get a game published, let's do something a little simpler. And then coming along to Cascadia, where I was doing pattern building, and tile laying and all of that. So a lot of it has been trying to, be broad in what I learned to what I design. But there's another aspect of it, which is like passion and progress. It's like, does it actually sing to me to work on this? And yeah, there's a hump you want to get over that might be hard, and you need to ignore that for a little bit and say, let me push through this first part, even though it's not enjoyable yet, because I like the idea. But at a certain point, either I'm going to have the passion to pursue it and put it into one of those like 1, 2, or 3 games I can actively be working on, or not, and it's either going to get totally sidelined or just pushed to the side for a while. Because I think it's it's going to be different if you're working for a game production company. If you're like working for Funko, you're going to have a very different process going about it. You need to do this and you need to do that. And I know some people who work at Funko and they love it, and it sounds like a blast. But at that point, it is a different process where I actually have the luxury, if you will, of saying, you know what, this one isn't speaking to me. This one is. Let me pursue this. And sometimes I think maybe I make some of those decisions poorly. Who knows? It'll be hard to say on some of them. So we'll see.
Well, I know one of the ones that you've talked about a few times. I want to make sure we cover it. Tabriz, which according to Board Game Geek, just for everybody, is described as a meeple moving game of careful planning and quick action in a bustling Persian bazaar. So talk to me a little bit about Tabriz, and for those who may not know, because obviously this one not quite out yet, but it's going to be one that I know you hope to have out soon.
Yeah. So Crafty Games is planning to do a crowdfunding campaign for Tabriz sometime this year. Date not set, so it's still definitely a little ways out. I can tell you lots of work on art and graphics have been done. It's been fun to see that process. But Tabriz, as I kind of mentioned earlier, was the game I designed after finishing up my civilization building game. Not finishing, but getting it to a playable point and going, okay, first time designer coming in with this big game. Like, I don't know if I'll ever get this signed. Let me do something else. And when I started Tabriz, I actually had something different in mind. And this is like the evolution of games, right? I was like, I want to, try something where you have a market of things, tiles, and you explore and they come out, which is funny because it's a lot like the civilization building game I did. It's just like Sid Meier, you move and, oh, look, there's planes over there. But this was going to be, hey, tiles randomly come out. I dropped that really quickly as it didn't really seem very interesting. But as I moved through the game, yeah, I ended up, focusing on worker movement, and I ended up focusing very much on buying and trading and a little bit of dice rolling involved in here. And how can I make this so that there's different arrangements of the tiles that are interesting? Funny thing is, I did all this before I ever played Istanbul, which you'll probably recognize a few elements of what I've talked about are in Istanbul. So at a certain point, I was like, I better go play Istanbul, just so that I know what, some of this. And I was very pleased because I liked Istanbul, but it was also different in many ways from what I was creating. And so that's kind of how Tabriz came about. That was sort of the reason for it. And I definitely was totally engaged. I was not designing anything else at that time. That was like the passion. I spent many, many late nights in my office just going through solo tests, a lot of 3-player solo tests where I'm playing all 3 players, going through and massaging. Before like 2 or 3 months into it, I went out for my first, public play test event and started bringing that into the process. So Crafty signed that game, as well as a game that I developed kind of after Tabriz was in good shape, called Tabriz the Card Game, that distilled some of those ideas down to something simpler. And they've been working on it a lot recently and coming up to the crowdfunding campaign soon. Now, Tabriz is interesting. Why? So I said I did a market game. I did not give it any theme at first. And if you find the early pictures of it, there's no real theme. It's just, hey, you're buying these resources. I can't even remember if they had names or they were just colors. I think they were just colors. And I went through trying to decide on the theme, and I had some thoughts. So maybe I'll do a space theme. Maybe I'll do this. But I lived in Iran, in Isfahan, Iran, for 2.5 years as a child. And it was my favorite place. We moved around about every 3 years. And it was the favorite place I lived as a kid. Loved it. And so at some point I started thinking, well, I know I want to make a game, themed based on Iran, because that's where I lived. And slowly came up with the Persian carpet theme. It's like, okay, we're making carpets. And it's definitely a case where the theme wasn't necessary to make a lot of progress on the game. But once you have it, it just informs a lot of decisions. And it really, really, really helps out. It's like, well, I have 5 materials. Well, what are those 5 materials? How do I know which materials are allowed on each carpet? Oh, wait, 3 of them are fabrics, 2 of them are dyes. Okay, and you kind of need both to make a fabric or to make a carpet. And these things kind of go on. So that was it. And then, and signing that game, it was my first game, and I was like, okay, I have some requirements if you're going to sign this game. And a big one is about the culture. It's like, if this game does not come out as a celebration of Persian culture, so we have a problem. And so here's the things I think need to be done, but I don't know a lot. And we need to make sure we focus on this. And that's been awesome to see. And we have cultural consultants. We actually have an Iranian artist doing the work. And so it's been good to produce that. And I'm really excited. I don't think it's going to be too much longer before some of the art starts going public. And I'm really excited for people to see what's been happening with it.
Before I ask a question that someone posed in the chat, I just want to say I really appreciate you speaking to the whole culture aspect, because more and more we're seeing people being hired for this work across the board, and maybe not enough. I think it's fair to say probably not enough, but you're seeing it start to be recognized. So it's really neat to hear about how you did that, because I do think, again, I mean, we go back and I often think of, say, Puerto Rico as a game or something, and say, well, I would love to love the game Puerto Rico, but for reasons I can't. And so I do think that it's such a great thing to hear about. You don't hear about it. I still think you don't hear about it all the time. So when we do hear about it, it is great. But I like to think progress is being made in that direction, but work to be done. Certainly one of the things, though, in terms of work, is pitching. And a man of a meeple asked a great question, which is, what is the most difficult part about pitching game to publisher? Do you consider specific publishers, or do you refer to anyone who is willing to listen?
Well, one, I honestly will pitch to any publisher, pretty much any publisher that's really willing to listen. As long as I don't have any other reason to worry about the publisher, I will pitch to them. But certainly once a game is to a point where it's pitchable, lots of thoughts and discussions happen about, well, who are publishers who might publish this? Who are publishers who might produce this really well? Who are publishers I'd love to see, publishing this game? Who are publishers I like the publisher, but I can't fathom this in their line. It would just be weird. And so a lot of those go on. I've in my co-designs in particular, I've had lots of detailed discussions about that, and we do it in playtests when we're playtesting with people who know the industry, whether they're content creators or designers or whatever, and we'll ask, whose lineup could you see this game in and why, and we'll take that information and kind of make that list of who we might consider and who we might contact about publishing it. So it's an interesting process.
It sounds like, from talking to you and others, asking questions of yourself, of others, just across the board, asking questions is a critical piece to being a designer, because you have to be posing questions all the time to make sure you're taking your game in the right direction towards the ultimate goal. That, especially when you're trying to get published, obviously. Yeah. There's one thing I did want to pose to you, which is, as a designer, what is it like in terms of time for yourself to play a game? Are you very often in your own world? Are you still getting the time to play other games? Because that's one of the things that, you do have to manage your time, and how much of that time do you really get to do something else? And it's varied, as I've asked people, but I think it's also a realistic thing to realize that you're going to have to give a lot of time to your game when you're in the design process.
Yeah. That's evolved a bit for me. There was definitely a point of the process of designing games where I didn't get to play nearly as many games as I would like, or was probably healthy for a designer still learning a lot, which is all of us. And I remember thinking about that. Like, I'm not playing all that many games. I was probably playing more prototypes than games at one point. This is a number of years ago, but at other people's prototypes as well as mine. And that kind of changed. Our family group just, I think, got more engaged, and it became much more regular of a thing for us to play games multiple times a week. We were very lucky during COVID. We've had our little pod, and there were 4 of us, which was perfect. So we played a lot of games. Lost Ruins of Arnak, you and I were talking about that a little bit before we got on the air, was one of the most popular games for us for about a year there. And so we play a lot, and they're the group is willing to learn new games, unless it's late, whatever. And we go through. So we've actually gotten to play quite, a wide variety of games, and I've really enjoyed that and appreciated that we've gotten there. I rarely say no to playing, even when in my head I'm going, I need to do this. Oh, and this one needs that. I still am pretty much like, oh, we're gonna play games. Great, we'll play games. So yeah, I think that's part of it. There's another part though, which is conventions. And I've certainly, before COVID, I got to where I was going to quite a few conventions, and I've gone to a few here recently, and we'll be going to more. But that's where I've typically had a very hard time playing many games. People go, oh, you went to PAX Unplugged. What did you play? Oh, we played a kiddie cooperative game with my friend and his kids. I might have played another thing. I played a couple prototypes in the Unpub room, but that's it. It's like, you were there all 3 days, right? Yeah, I was. But I was playtesting for, 2 slots. I was walking the floor to make publisher contacts. I had 20 people that I had only known online during COVID that were going to be at the show that I wanted to at least, have a brief conversation with and meet. And so all of these things, come in line. And so it's difficult for me at a what I call a full service convention like PAX Unplugged or a Gen Con or an Origins to play a lot of games. There's a lot of other things that go on. So I really appreciate going to something like what I went recently is to Granite Game Summit up in Nashua, New Hampshire. And, that was, 4 days this time, which was awesome, of mostly playing games. I did a designer alley, 2 hours of my prototypes. I played a few other designers' prototypes in there as well. But I also got to learn the Gallerist, which, was half an afternoon. And I got to play Rococo on my way out, which I had only played once before and also took a number of hours and was a blast. And then the number of small games I played was awesome. And so I think I just have to accept that, most full service conventions, I've got a lot more going on. And yeah, I may play a game here or two. I learned Root at PAX Unplugged a while ago, but I'm not going to play a lot of games, and I need to go to these other cons to be able to do that, because I love doing that too. I love having no distractions of the house and, you know, all the responsibilities. You know, they're like 95% gone at that point, and you can just say, "Yeah, I got to sleep, I got to eat, I got to play games." You know, that's it.
I will say I've heard amazing. I think Granite's on our list for both Ryan and I here on the channel for next year, because my one friend in town went there, and then we were just like, why were we not at this event? So I think that has joined our PAX Unplugged list of events that we put on our priority list. So because PAX was great, don't get me wrong, but I even felt that same thing, because PAX was interesting. I found myself walking around and being, hey, how are you? I've talked to you online. Hey, how are you? I've talked to you. And that was the feel. So, and it wasn't playing. That was the ironic thing, is we're just talking. It wasn't playing games with them. And I think maybe it'll be different next year, because we've had a year, and it's hopefully, I like to cross my fingers. But, you know, one last really important question, unless someone else in the chat has any other ones. I know we've got a few that got sent in. I've already asked you. When you do talk to someone who is a first-time designer, as you've been there, or and as a when it comes down to it, what advice do you give someone who wants to design a board game? What do you tell them?
You know, it's funny. I'm not sure I have the greatest advice. You know, there's all these different things I do, but you know, the main thing just to remember is if you play games, if you get an idea of how they work, if you like playing games and you like creating things, you almost all surely can design a playable game. Like, there's just, you know, it's not a special skill, you know, to me, to be able to design a fun playable game. A lot of it comes down to effort. You know, it's like, you know, how much of your passion, your energy are you willing to put into it? And I think if it's there and you have the desire, you'll be able to create something that you'll enjoy, and you can make other people enjoy. You know, that's kind of my first thing. And then the second thing is to figure out how to listen. You know, that's really, really important. I'm someone who lives in my head a lot and knows how to design games in my head a lot. And I'm pretty successful at doing things in my head. But I know those will never be quite as good if I stop there. You know, there's this iteration that comes out that you're going to miss things, that you're going to not realize, oh, this is fun to me. It's logical. It fits together. It's balanced. It's this. But maybe it's not fun to anyone else, and I miss it. Yeah, that's just an example, but it's that things of, you know, what sort of feedback can you get? And in this day and age, you know, there's all the good news is there's a lot of different ways to do that. You know, there's plenty of online simulators that you can use, you know, to play with people that aren't in your area. You know, we were lucky here in Seattle to have Playtest Northwest, you know, allowing us to get out there and try our games with people who actually enjoy coming to Playtest games. But, you know, I think getting that feedback and understanding how to listen to the feedback and take it in is important, because you can neither go back and reject feedback just because it doesn't fit your worldview, nor can you go just accept that everything everyone tells you need to do. Someone was telling me a story about that recently. I had a designer, they got like 7 pieces of feedbacks, like on their first game, and they went back and they implemented all 7 and came back and said, oh, here it is. And they're all kind of like, well, I don't know that it's very different from before, but I don't think doing all 7 of these things really did much for the game. So, you know, lots of iteration there, of course.
No, and I appreciate that. I will note, I had the experience of judging for Cardboard Edison recently, and it was an experience on my end to go through to give the feedback, and I had the chance to talk to many of the folks after, because, you know, and that was the most enjoyable part, and saying, hey, what do you think can help get this to this, and say, look, I'm one person, this is just my take, here's some of the thoughts I had. And but it was really interesting, and I think that willingness to learn stood out from the folks that did reach out, because it was a cool opportunity that I enjoyed, and I wanted to, you know, give it back. So being able to listen is critical. Even if you don't design board games, being able to listen is a really important skill that people should develop anyways. I want to take the time to say thank you to you. Thank you to people who, of course, popped in and out here tonight. And I know we'll have a bunch pop in who would attend at our more normal time slot. And I'm really thrilled that I got a chance to chat with you, Randy. Is there anything else, anything that you would like to share, anything else that you want to get out there before I close down the Express tonight?
I don't really think so. I think you covered a lot of what we talked about ahead of time. I think you covered a lot of stuff during the ground. I'm not sure I really have a ton to add to it. It's a lot of fun.
I will add this. I will add just a friendly reminder for everyone to be on the lookout for Tabriz and Tabriz the card game. I'll certainly, just for folks so you know, I'll update this video when I see those out and make sure that there's links accordingly. So be on the lookout for those. And certainly if you have not played Cascadia, take the opportunity to do it. I highly recommend it. There is a reason it's in the top 100 and number one abstract at this point. So it's just ahead of Azul, which is not bad company to be in. Certainly.
Not at all. And Cascadia is showing back up in stores in the US and I think the UK now as well. It is available from AEG's online store as well as I think Amazon, but also the Flat Out Games Verdant Kickstarter Pledge Manager is still open and you can actually get it there if you want it delivered to you this summer.
Well, that's right, because Verdant's getting close. That's got to be closing soon too. So,
I don't know the timetable, but
yeah, what a great series of games that will all be in my collection at the end of the year. So, I thank you, Randy. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I just want to thank everyone else who did tune in tonight. Thank you for coming aboard the Tabletop Express. This has been Creators Corner. On that note, I'm going to say thank you to everyone who came aboard tonight, and have a wonderful evening.